The great crystal hall on Nexara Prime sparkled with cold light. Admiral Vextar stood at the center of the room, his blue scales catching the glow from the walls. Around him sat the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy. They had come from hundreds of worlds to attend this secret meeting. "We gather today to discuss a threat that may not even exist," Vextar said. His voice echoed in the vast chamber. "The humans." A low growl came from Commander Yulthak. The reptilian warrior's red eyes glowed with anger. "You waste our time with fairy tales, Admiral. Humans are myths, stories told to scare children." Dr. Mordun stepped forward. The old scientist carried a data pad in his thin hands. "Perhaps not, Commander. I have found something interesting in the old archives." The doctor touched his data pad. Images appeared in the air above them. Ancient text scrolled past in languages that few beings could still read. These records are over 300 years old. They speak of a species called humans. They came from a world called Earth in the Sol system. "Even if they existed," said General Kixara, her 4 arms crossed over her chest, "they would be long dead by now. No primitive species survives contact with the Coalition for long." Mordun touched his pad again. New images appeared. These showed strange ships with rough, ugly designs. They looked nothing like the smooth, beautiful vessels that Coalition races built. "The records say these humans fought differently. They used weapons that threw metal pieces instead of energy beams. Their ships were covered in thick armor instead of shields." Commander Yulthak laughed. "Metal weapons against energy shields? These primitives would have been crushed in minutes." "That is what makes these records so strange," Mordun continued. "According to these files, the humans won several battles. The records speak of tactics that no civilized race would use. They say humans could survive in space without proper life support. They could fight in temperatures that would kill most of us." Admiral Vextar studied the images. The human ships looked crude and dangerous, like weapons built by savages who did not understand proper engineering. "Where did you find these records, Doctor?" "In the wreckage of ancient battlefields along the Outer Rim, ships that have been floating in space for centuries. Most of the data was corrupted, but I was able to save some files." Mordun paused. "There is something else. The records mention human colonies, not just their homeworld, but settlements on dozens of planets." The room fell quiet. If humans had really spread across the galaxy, what had happened to them? Why had no one seen them for 300 years? "Even if humans were real," said Admiral Vextar, "they are gone now. We control all the star systems in this region. Our scouts would have found them." "Perhaps," said Dr. Mordun, "but the records suggest something troubling. They say humans were very good at hiding. They could make their ships invisible to our sensors. They could live on worlds we thought were empty. Far from the Crystal Hall, in the darkness between the stars, 3 ships drifted silently. They were hidden in an asteroid field near Nexara Prime's outer moon. To any scanner, they looked like floating rocks. But inside, they were alive with activity." Captain Huan sat in the command chair of the stealth destroyer Silent Thunder. He was a tall man with dark hair and calm eyes. He watched the alien meeting through tiny spy drones that no Coalition scanner could detect. The drones looked like space dust, but they could see and hear everything. "They still think we are myths," said Lieutenant Nari from her station. She was young but skilled, her fingers dancing across controls that monitored alien communications. "They have no idea we are listening to every word they say." Sergeant Tay stood near the back of the bridge. He was a large man with scars from many battles. His job was to lead boarding parties when stealth was no longer needed. "Should we show them the truth, Captain? My men are ready." Captain Huan shook his head. "Not yet, Sergeant. We are not ready for open war. We need to learn more about their new weapons and ships. Patience has kept us alive for 3 centuries. It will serve us a little longer." On the view screen, they watched as the Alien Council continued their debate. Dr. Mordun was showing more images from the ancient files. Pictures of human soldiers in crude armor, videos of human ships ramming coalition vessels instead of fighting at long range. "Look how they react," said Lieutenant Nari. "They think these tactics are stupid. They do not understand that sometimes the simple way is the best way." The aliens in the council chamber were laughing now. They found the idea of humans using metal bullets instead of energy weapons to be hilarious. They could not imagine why any race would choose physical weapons over advanced technology. Admiral Vextar raised his hand for silence. Whether humans were real or not does not matter. What matters is that we are planning to expand into the Outer Rim sectors. If there are any primitive species in those regions, they will be dealt with according to standard protocols. Standard protocols meant complete destruction or slavery. The Coalition had used these methods for 1,000 years to clear new territory for their expansion. Captain Juan's jaw tightened as he listened. Around the bridge, his crew grew tense. These aliens were planning to attack worlds where human refugees lived. Worlds where children grew up learning to hide from Coalition scouts. Worlds where people worked every day to stay invisible and safe. "Captain," whispered Lieutenant Nari, "they are talking about Operation Starfall, a massive fleet to cleanse the outer sectors of all primitive life." Through the spy drones, they watched Admiral Vextar outline his plan. 500 Coalition warships would sweep through dozens of star systems. Any world with intelligent life that was not part of the Coalition would be purged. The operation would begin in 6 months. Captain Juan stood up slowly. For 300 years, humanity had hidden in the shadows. They had built secret bases on dead worlds. They had raised children who learned to fight and hide before they could walk. They had developed new technologies while pretending to be extinct. All of that hiding had led to this moment. "Lieutenant Nari," he said quietly, "send a coded message to all human settlements. Tell them Operation Starfall is confirmed. 6 months until the Coalition fleet moves." "Yes, sir. What should I tell them about our response?" Captain Juan looked at the alien leaders on his screen. They were still laughing about primitive human weapons and tactics. They had no idea that human technology had advanced far beyond anything they could imagine. They did not know that human patience was about to end. "Tell them," he said, "that the time for hiding is over." In the Crystal Hall, Admiral Vexatar dismissed the council. The alien leaders left to prepare their fleets for Operation Starfall. They went to their ships, thinking about easy victories against primitive savages. None of them noticed the tiny objects that looked like space dust floating near their vessels. None of them realized that every word they had spoken was recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. In hidden bases throughout space, humans began to prepare for war. The legends were about to become real. 6 months had passed since the meeting on Nexara Prime. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching 500 Coalition warships drop out of hyperspace. They had arrived at Kepler 442b, a green world that Coalition scouts said was home to primitive creatures. The planet looked peaceful from space. Blue oceans and white clouds covered most of its surface. The scouts had reported seeing simple villages and farms. They said the local creatures used basic tools and had no space technology. "Perfect target for our first strike," said Commander Yulthak. He stood beside the Admiral, eager for battle. "These primitives will not even know what hit them." Admiral Vextar nodded. "Begin scanning the planet. I want to see these primitive settlements before we destroy them." The fleet's sensors swept across the world below. The results were strange. Instead of finding villages and cities, the scanners showed empty land. No buildings, no life signs, no technology. "Sir," said the sensor officer, "I am not detecting any intelligent life on the planet. No settlements, no infrastructure, nothing." Vextar frowned. "That cannot be right. The scouts confirmed primitive inhabitants. Scan again." The sensors swept the planet 3 more times. Each scan showed the same result. The world appeared completely empty of intelligent life. "Perhaps the primitives saw us coming and ran away," suggested Commander Yulthak. "Some species flee to caves or underground shelters when they see our ships." "Run deep scans," ordered Admiral Vextar. "Check for underground facilities or hidden settlements." While the Coalition fleet searched for signs of life on the empty planet, they did not notice the shadows moving behind them. In the darkness of space, hundreds of objects drifted closer to the alien ships. To Coalition sensors, they looked like asteroids or space debris. Captain Juan sat in his command chair aboard the Silent Thunder. Around him, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. Through the viewports, he could see the Coalition fleet spread out in a loose formation. They were completely focused on the planet below. "All human ships report ready, Captain," said Lieutenant Nari. She had been promoted to his second-in-command after months of preparation. "We have 300 vessels in position." Captain Juan smiled grimly. The Coalition thought they were facing primitive savages on a single world. They had no idea that humanity's ghost fleet surrounded them. For 3 centuries, humans had built ships in secret. They had carved shipyards into asteroids and constructed bases inside dead moons. The human fleet looked nothing like Coalition vessels. Where alien ships were smooth and elegant, human warships were rough and angular. They were covered in thick armor plating and bristled with weapon systems that Coalition engineers would not understand. "Sir," said the communications officer, "we are receiving surrender demands from the Coalition fleet. They are ordering all primitive inhabitants to prepare for relocation." Relocation was the Coalition's polite word for slavery or death. "They would take the useful members of a species as workers and kill the rest. Send them our reply," said Captain Juan. Lieutenant Nari nodded and activated the fleet's communication system. Across space, every Coalition ship received the same message. It was short and simple. "No." Admiral Vexitar stared at his communication screen in confusion. The message had come from empty space. His sensors still showed no signs of intelligent life anywhere in the system. "Sir," said his sensor officer, "I am picking up some strange readings. There appear to be objects moving behind us." "Asteroids," said Commander Yulthak dismissively. "This system has many floating rocks." The sensor officer looked worried. "Sir, these objects are moving in formation, and they are accelerating toward us." Admiral Vextar turned to look at his tactical display. Hundreds of red dots were converging on his fleet from all directions. They were moving too fast and too precisely to be natural objects. "Raise shields," he ordered. "All ships prepare for possible contact with unknown vessels." As if responding to his command, the attacking objects suddenly revealed themselves. Stealth fields collapsed and jamming systems shut down. Where empty space had been moments before, 300 human warships appeared. The Coalition bridge crew gasped in shock. These were not the primitive vessels they expected to find. The human ships were smaller than Coalition dreadnoughts, but they radiated menace. They looked like they had been built for one purpose: war. "Impossible," whispered Commander Yulthak. "Where did they come from?" Captain Juan's voice echoed across all Coalition communication channels. "Coalition fleet, you have entered human space without permission. You have threatened human colonies. This is your only warning. Retreat now or face the consequences." Admiral Vextar's shock quickly turned to anger. Human space? These primitives claim to own this system? He opened a channel to the unknown fleet. "I am Admiral Vextar of the Coalition Navy. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed." The response came not in words, but in action. The human fleet suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds. Coalition sensors registered velocity readings that should have killed any crew through acceleration forces. No living being could survive. The G-forces these ships were pulling, yet somehow the human vessels kept accelerating, closing the distance between the fleets in seconds instead of minutes. "All ships open fire!" Admiral Vexitar commanded. The Coalition fleet unleashed its energy weapons. Bright beams of concentrated plasma and laser fire swept across space toward the approaching human ships. The aliens expected to see the primitive vessels destroyed instantly. Instead, the human ships kept coming. Their thick armor absorbed energy blasts that would have vaporized Coalition vessels. Some human ships took dozens of direct hits but continued attacking without slowing down. When the human fleet reached firing range, they revealed weapons that Coalition science said should not exist. Instead of energy beams, the human ships fired solid projectiles. Massive chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds by magnetic fields. These primitive weapons tore through Coalition energy shields as if they were not there. The magnetic shields that protected alien ships from energy weapons were useless against solid objects moving at near light speed. Lieutenant Nari coordinated the human attack from her station. Target their command ships first. Disable their communications before they can call for help. Across the human fleet, captains followed her orders. Tungsten slugs fired from railguns smashed into Coalition flagships. The metal projectiles punched through armor and shields like needles through paper, but the most terrifying part of the battle was still to come. As Coalition ships tried to retreat to safer distances, human vessels did something no civilized race would attempt. They closed to point-blank range for boarding actions. Sergeant Tay led the first boarding party. His ship, the Iron Will, rammed directly into the side of a Coalition cruiser. The human vessel's reinforced prow tore through alien hull plating like it was made of foil. Breach successful, Tay reported over the radio. Beginning boarding operations. He led his team through the hole their ship had made. They wore simple pressure suits and carried weapons that fired metal bullets. To Coalition defenders, they looked like primitives with crude equipment. The human boarding parties moved through Coalition ships like they were born to fight in zero gravity. They ignored environmental hazards that would kill most species. When their suits were damaged and air leaked out, they kept fighting while holding their breath. Coalition crew members found their energy weapons were less effective in the close confines of their own ships. The humans' simple bullet weapons worked just as well in corridors as they did in space. Admiral Vexitar watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. These were not the primitive savages his scouts had reported. These humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and savage tactics that no civilized race would use. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we have lost contact with 60% of our fleet. Many ships are reporting boarding parties in their hulls." "How is this possible?" Vexitar demanded. "Our intelligence said this species was extinct." Through his view screen, he watched human ships ram Coalition vessels at full speed. The human crews survived impacts that should have killed everyone aboard. Some human ships were cut in half by Coalition weapons, but kept fighting with their remaining weapons still firing. "Sir," said his sensor officer, "the remaining human ships are regrouping for another attack. We have lost 300 ships. They have lost less than 50. Admiral Vexitar realized his mistake too late. The Coalition had spent centuries fighting civilized enemies who followed predictable rules of engagement. They fought at long range with energy weapons and tried to minimize casualties. Humans fought like wild animals. They used every advantage, ignored their own safety, and employed tactics that no sane military leader would consider. They turned their own ships into weapons and their crews into living missiles. "All remaining ships," Vexitar commanded, "retreat to hyperspace immediately. We cannot win this battle." As the surviving Coalition vessels fled the system, Captain Juan watched them go. His fleet had won a crushing victory, but he knew this was only the beginning. "Lieutenant Nari," he said, "send a message to all human colonies. Tell them the war has begun. Tell them it is time to stop hiding." The Coalition High Command building on Centauri Prime buzzed with panic. Emergency meetings ran day and night as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The humans were not just alive, they were everywhere. Admiral Vextar stood before a room, full of coalition leaders. His scales had lost their blue shine and now looked gray with stress. "The situation is worse than we first thought," he said. "The attack at Kepler 442b was not an isolated incident. Human forces have struck 17 coalition installations in the past month." General Kixara slammed her 4 fists on the table. "How is this possible? Our scouts reported no human presence in any of these systems. Our sensors show nothing." Dr. Morden pulled up tactical displays showing the recent attacks. Each strike had followed the same pattern. Coalition forces would arrive at what appeared to be an empty system, then suddenly find themselves surrounded by human ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. "They have perfected stealth technology beyond our understanding," the old scientist explained. "Our best sensors cannot detect their ships until they choose to reveal themselves." What the coalition leaders did not know was that deep in space, hidden inside a manufactured asteroid, Admiral Kyung coordinated every human operation. She sat in the command center of humanity's greatest secret, a mobile base the size of a small moon. Admiral Kyung was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair. She had spent 30 years planning for this war. Around her, dozens of officers worked at stations monitoring human forces across the galaxy. "Report from Sector 7, said her aide, Commander June. "Captain Su's mission was successful. The Coalition ammunition depot at Rigel Station has been compromised." Kyung nodded. "Excellent. What about our infiltration teams?" "All assets are in position. We have people inside Coalition military headquarters, shipyards, and even government buildings. When you give the signal, they will activate." The truth that terrified coalition leaders was that humans had spent 3 centuries preparing for this war. While the aliens thought humanity was extinct, human agents had spread throughout coalition space. They lived among alien populations, often with surgical modifications to look like other species. Captain Su stood in the uniform of a coalition maintenance worker. He was inside Rigel Station, the Coalition's largest weapons manufacturing facility. For 2 years he had worked here, fixing equipment and learning the facility's systems. Now he stood in the central computer core, connecting a small device to the main production controls. The device looked harmless, just a simple data storage unit, but it contained a virus that would change everything the factory produced. "Upload complete," he whispered into his hidden communicator. "All weapons manufactured here will now have microscopic flaws. They will function normally for weeks, then fail catastrophically when used in battle. The Coalition would not discover the sabotage for months. By then, their fleets would be full of defective weapons that would explode in their own gun barrels during combat." On Centauri Beta, Commander June sat in a classroom at the Coalition's most prestigious naval academy. He had spent 2 years disguised as a student from the Rigelian Empire. His surgical modifications made him look exactly like a typical Rigelian officer candidate. But June was not learning. He was teaching. Not openly, but through subtle influence and carefully placed suggestions during tactical exercises. "In this scenario," said the alien instructor, "how would you counter an enemy fleet that uses ramming attacks?" A young coalition officer raised his hand. "Maintain long-range engagement and use our superior firepower to destroy them before they can close distance." "Correct," said the instructor. "The proper response to primitive tactics is to use our technological advantages." June raised his hand. "What if the enemy has armor too thick for our weapons to penetrate at long range? Would it not be better to concentrate fire on single targets to overwhelm their defenses?" The instructor considered this. It sounded logical. An interesting point. Yes, concentrated fire would be more effective against heavily armored targets. What the instructor did not realize was that June had just taught them to bunch their ships together in tight formations. When these students became officers and used this tactic against human forces, the concentrated formations would make perfect targets for human mass driver weapons. Week by week, class by class, June subtly influenced coalition naval doctrine. He suggested improvements that seemed reasonable, but actually created weaknesses that human commanders could exploit. Similar scenes played out across coalition space. Human agents worked in shipyards, suggesting design changes that would make coalition vessels easier to board. They worked in supply depots, ensuring that spare parts would be in short supply when the war escalated. They worked in communication centers, learning coalition codes and frequencies. The coalition had no idea they were being systematically undermined from within. Back on her asteroid base, Admiral Kyung received reports from agents throughout the galaxy. Each report confirmed that humanity's long preparation was paying off. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Nari, now serving as Kyung's intelligence coordinator, "our people inside Coalition High Command report that they are planning a major offensive, Operation Hammerfall, 1,000 ships to strike at suspected human bases." Kyung smiled coldly. "Let them come. Do they have any idea where they plan to attack?" 3 systems in the Outer Rim. All places where we have deliberately left false. Evidence of human colonies. The coalition was walking into another trap. The 3 systems they planned to attack were empty except for automated defenses and holographic projectors designed to create the illusion of human settlements. Meanwhile, General Wu prepared for the most audacious operation of the war. He stood in the briefing room of a stealth transport ship, addressing 50 of humanity's best Special Forces soldiers. "Our target is Coalition Fleet Command on Vega Station," he said. "This is their primary naval headquarters. We will infiltrate the station and capture their central computer core." One of his soldiers raised her hand. "Sir, how do we get past their security? Vega Station has more defenses than any other coalition facility." General Wu activated a holographic display showing the massive space station. It bristled with weapon systems and energy shields. Thousands of coalition personnel worked inside its armored hull. "We do not go through their defenses," he said. "We go around them." He touched a control, and the display changed to show detailed blueprints of the station's internal structure. "Our infiltration team has been working inside Vega Station for 6 months. They have identified a weakness in the station's outer hull that our people can exploit." The weakness was not a design flaw. It was a maintenance shaft that human agents had secretly modified during routine repairs. To coalition security scanners, it would look normal. But it was actually a hidden entrance that led directly to the station's core, while coalition forces prepared for their major offensive against fake human colonies. Humanity prepared to strike at the heart of their enemy's command structure. Captain Huan received new orders from Admiral Kyung. His stealth destroyer Silent Thunder was to lead a strike force against a coalition supply convoy. Intelligence reports showed that the convoy carried new weapon systems that the coalition hoped would be effective against human armor. "These new weapons use quantum disruption technology," Lieutenant Nari explained as she briefed the attack plan. "They are supposed to be able to penetrate any physical armor by disrupting the molecular bonds that hold matter together." Captain Huan studied the convoy's route. 12 coalition ships carrying the new weapons, escorted by 30 warships, a formidable force by most standards. "How many ships do we have for this mission?" he asked. 6 stealth destroyers and 12 attack cruisers, Nari replied. The odds seemed bad, 18 human ships against 42 coalition vessels. But Captain Huan had learned not to think in terms of numbers. Human tactics had advantages that coalition commanders could not understand. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "We attack at the convoy's next hyperspace exit point. Make sure our ECM systems are ready to jam their communications. We do not want them calling for help." As human forces across the galaxy prepared for their next wave of attacks, coalition leaders grew more desperate. They could not understand how a supposedly extinct species had appeared with such advanced technology and perfect intelligence about coalition operations. Admiral Vextar reviewed damage reports from the latest human strikes. 7 supply convoys destroyed. 4 military bases captured. 2 coalition fleets ambushed and decimated. Each attack showed the same pattern. Humans appeared from nowhere, struck with overwhelming force, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. "They fight like ghosts," he said to Dr. Morden. "How do we battle an enemy we cannot find?" The old scientist looked tired. He had been studying captured human equipment for weeks, trying to understand their technology. "Their stealth systems are beyond anything we have seen. But more troubling is their intelligence network. They seem to know our plans before we make them." Neither alien realized how right Dr. Mordoon was. At that very moment, a coalition officer working 3 doors down from Admiral Vextar's office was transmitting their conversation to Admiral Kyung's headquarters. 1 year after the first human attack, Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the largest fleet in coalition history prepare for hyperspace jump. 2,000 warships from every member species floated in perfect formation around him. This was the coalition's final gamble. "Admiral," said his communications officer, "all fleet elements report ready for jump to the Sol system." Vextar nodded grimly. Intelligence suggested that Sul was humanity's legendary birth world. If they could destroy the human home system, they could end this nightmare war once and for all. "Begin the jump," he ordered. The massive fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving only empty space behind. They traveled for days through the twisted dimensions of faster-than-light travel, carrying the hopes of every coalition world. When they emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, what they saw made every alien commander freeze in shock. "Impossible," whispered Commander Yulthok. The Sol system was not the primitive backwater they expected. Instead, they found a fortress that spanned 8 planets and dozens of moons. Earth itself glowed with orbital defense platforms and massive shipyards. Mars bristled with planetary defense cannons that dwarfed anything in coalition arsenals. But the most shocking sight was Jupiter. The giant planet's moons had been converted into mobile battle stations. Each one was larger than a coalition dreadnought and covered with weapon systems. "Sir," said the sensor officer, "I am reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. There are defense installations on every planet and moon. The asteroid belt has been turned into a minefield." Admiral Vextar stared at his tactical display. Instead of finding a few primitive colonies, they had discovered a military stronghold that made coalition homeworlds look defenseless. "How many ships are defending this system?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. Our sensors are being jammed by interference we cannot identify, but I am detecting thousands of energy signatures." Deep within the Sol system, Admiral Kyung sat in the command center of humanity's greatest fortress. Earth's orbital defense network was just the beginning. Humanity had spent 3 centuries turning their home system into the most heavily defended region in the galaxy. "Coalition fleet has arrived," reported Lieutenant Nari from her station. 2,000 ships, just as our intelligence predicted. Admiral Kyung smiled. "Perfect. Are all our forces in position?" "Yes, ma'am. Every human ship in the galaxy has returned home for this battle. We have 4,000 vessels ready for combat. But numbers were not humanity's greatest advantage. During their centuries in hiding, humans had developed technologies that coalition science said were impossible. They had learned to manipulate the very fabric of space and time. Captain Huan commanded the flagship Terra's Wrath, the largest warship humanity had ever built. Around him, his bridge crew prepared for a battle that would determine the fate of both species. "Captain," said his sensor officer, "the coalition fleet is advancing in standard attack formation. They are maintaining long-range engagement distances." "Of course they are," Huan replied. "They still think we fight like civilized species. Prepare the dimensional drives." Throughout the human fleet, exotic engines powered up. These were not the conventional hyperspace drives that most species used. Humans had learned to tear holes in space itself, creating doorways that allowed instant travel across any distance. The Coalition fleet advanced steadily toward Earth, expecting another conventional battle. Their energy weapons charged and their shields raised to maximum power. Admiral Vexitar felt confident that superior numbers would finally give them victory. Then space began to fold. "Sir!" the Coalition sensor officer shouted. "Unknown energy readings throughout the system. Something is happening to space itself." Reality rippled like water around the human ships. Dimensional portals opened and closed, allowing human vessels to appear and disappear at will. Ships that had been light minutes away suddenly materialized behind Coalition formations. Captain Juan's Terra's Wrath stepped through a hole in space and emerged directly above Admiral Vexitar's flagship. The massive human dreadnought dropped out of its dimensional portal like a predator pouncing on prey. "Fire," Juan ordered calmly. The Terra's Wrath unleashed weapons that Coalition scientists had never imagined. Gravity cannons created tiny black holes that tore enemy ships apart from within. Quantum torpedoes existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them impossible to avoid or intercept. The Coalition flagship shields, designed to stop energy weapons, were useless against attacks that ignored conventional physics. The first volley tore through Vexitar's command ship like it was made of paper. Across the battlefield, human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts. They used dimensional portals not just for movement, but as weapons. Some human vessels opened portals inside Coalition ships, venting atmosphere and crew into space. Others opened portals that led directly into the hearts of stars, flooding enemy vessels with plasma that burned at millions of degrees. General Wu led human ground forces in the strangest battle of the war. His soldiers did not travel in transport, ships, or landing craft. Instead, they stepped through portable dimensional gateways that opened directly inside Coalition command centers. "Breach successful," Wu reported, as his team emerged from a swirling portal in the middle of a Coalition cruiser's bridge. "Beginning capture operations." The alien crew barely had time to react before armed humans were among them. The soldiers wore armor that seemed to bend light around it, making them nearly invisible. Their weapons fired projectiles that could punch through any material known to Coalition science. But the most terrifying part was that these humans seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics. When gravity generators tried to crush them, they kept fighting. When life support failed and the air was sucked out of the ship, they held their breath and continued their assault. Admiral Vexitar watched his fleet disintegrate around him. Coalition ships designed for energy combat were helpless against enemies who could manipulate space and time. Their formations scattered as human vessels appeared in their midst without warning. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we have lost 60% of our fleet in the first hour. Enemy casualties are minimal." "How are they doing this?" Vexitar demanded. "These weapons should not be possible." Through his view screen, he watched a human ship create a dimensional portal that led directly into a Coalition dreadnought's reactor core. The alien vessel exploded from within as its own power systems were turned against it. Another Coalition ship tried to retreat, but found a human vessel waiting for it on the other side of a dimensional fold. The human captain had somehow predicted exactly where the alien ship would emerge from hyperspace and was ready with a full weapons barrage. Dr. Morden, monitoring the battle from a research vessel, began to understand the terrible truth. "Admiral," he said over the communication system, "these humans have not just advanced their technology. They have transcended it. They are using principles of physics that we do not even understand. The Coalition had spent 1,000 years perfecting energy weapons and defensive shields. They had built their entire military doctrine around long-range combat between fleets that followed predictable movement patterns. Humans fought with controlled chaos. Their ships moved through dimensions that Coalition sensors could not detect. Their weapons ignored defenses that had protected alien fleets for centuries. Their tactics were impossible to predict because they were based on technologies that should not exist. As the battle continued, It became clear that the coalition was not just losing, they were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that had evolved beyond conventional warfare. Captain Juan opened a communication channel to all coalition ships. "Admiral Vextar, this is your final warning. Surrender now, and your surviving crews will be treated with honor. Continue fighting and watch your fleet burn." Vextar looked at his tactical display. Of his 2,000 ships, fewer than 400 remained combat effective. The humans had lost less than 50 vessels. It was not a battle. It was a demonstration of absolute technological superiority. "Sir," said Commander Yulthak, his voice hollow with defeat, "perhaps we should consider their offer." Admiral Vextar had spent his entire career believing that coalition technology was the most advanced in the galaxy. Now he faced enemies who used physics itself as a weapon and made spacefold to their will. For the first time in coalition history, their greatest fleet was ready to surrender to an enemy they had once considered extinct primitives. The legends had been wrong about humans. They were not crude warriors with simple weapons. They were masters of reality itself, and they had been hiding in plain sight for 300 years, waiting for this moment. As dimensional portals continued to open and close around the battlefield, Admiral Vextar realized that humanity had not just survived contact with the coalition, they had evolved beyond it. The Great War Room on Luna had been built specifically for this moment. Admiral Kyung stood at the head of a long table made from materials mined from Earth's moon. Through the massive transparent dome overhead, the blue marble of humanity's home world hung in the black sky like a precious jewel. Across from her sat the surviving coalition leaders. Admiral Vextar looked older than his years, his scales now completely gray. Beside him, Dr. Mordun clutched data pads containing readings from the Battle of Seoul that still made no sense to coalition science. "The terms are simple," Admiral Kyung said. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Complete cessation of hostilities. Recognition of human sovereignty over all systems we currently occupy. And full diplomatic relations between our peoples." Commander Yulthak, one of the few coalition officers who had survived the battle, growled softly. "You could have offered these terms before destroying our fleets. Why wait until now?" Admiral Kyung's expression remained neutral. "Because the coalition needed to understand what they were dealing with. For 1,000 years, your people have expanded across the galaxy by destroying or enslaving every species you encountered. You only respect strength." Admiral Vexatar studied the human leader across the table. She appeared to be a simple woman in her 50s, with gray hair and intelligent eyes. But he had watched her coordinate a battle that defied everything he thought he knew about warfare. "Your technology," he said slowly. "How long have you possessed these capabilities? Dimensional manipulation?" Kyung smiled slightly. "We achieved basic space-time folding about 60 years ago. The weapon systems you saw were developed more recently." Dr. Mordun looked up from his data pads. 60 years? But our records show that humans were primitive when first contact occurred 3 centuries ago. Your records are incomplete, Doctor." Admiral Kyung touched a control on the table. Holographic displays appeared showing star charts and historical data. "The truth is more complex than your legends suggest." The displays showed Earth 300 years ago, but not the primitive World Coalition records described. Instead, they saw a civilization already reaching for the stars, with early interstellar ships and growing colonies on nearby worlds. "When we first detected coalition expansion toward our space," Kyung continued, "we faced a choice. We could fight openly and likely be destroyed, or we could be more creative in our approach." Captain Juan entered the room, followed by Lieutenant Nari and several other human officers. They took seats along one side of the table, facing the coalition delegation. "The war your records describe," Captain Juan said. "The one that supposedly destroyed most of humanity. That was largely fiction." Admiral Vextar felt cold fear creep up his spine. "Fiction?" We needed the Coalition to believe they had won, explained Lieutenant Nari. It was the only way to ensure our long-term survival. So we created false evidence of massive human casualties. We made you think you had reduced us to a few scattered refugees hiding on dead worlds. The truth was staggering. Most humans had not been refugees fleeing a destroyed homeworld. They had been colonists, deliberately establishing hidden settlements throughout Coalition space. For 3 centuries, they had lived among alien species, gathering intelligence and preparing for inevitable conflict. Commander June stepped forward. I spent 2 years at your Naval Academy on Centauri Beta, not as a disguised refugee, but as a deliberate infiltrator. Everything I learned about Coalition tactics and weaknesses was transmitted back to our command. You, Admiral Vextar whispered. You were the Rigelian exchange student. Surgically modified to appear Rigelian, yes, and I was not alone. We have had people inside Coalition institutions for decades. Your shipyards, your military academies, your government offices. We have studied you from within. Dr. Mordun's hands shook as he reviewed his data pads. The tactical modifications you suggested to our students, the improvements to our ship designs, the supply chain recommendations, all carefully calculated to create weaknesses we could exploit when the time came, June confirmed. General Wu entered the chamber and took his place at the table. The weapons and technologies we used in our recent battles, none of them were developed in response to your attacks. We have possessed these capabilities for years. We simply waited for the right moment to reveal them. The Coalition delegation sat in stunned silence. They had not been fighting a desperate enemy struggling for survival. They had been fighting an opponent who had spent centuries studying their every weakness while developing overwhelming technological advantages. Admiral. Kyung activated another display. This one showed the true extent of human presence in the galaxy. Red dots appeared on star chart after star chart marking human colonies, bases, and infiltration points. There are more humans in Coalition space than there are Coalition citizens. On most of your member worlds, she said matter-of-factly, we have been your neighbors, your co-workers, your students, and your suppliers for generations. Captain Su spoke from his position near the door. The ammunition factory on Rigel Station, where I worked for 2 years, I was not sabotaging your weapons. I was ensuring they would fail at precisely the right moment to give our forces maximum advantage. Admiral Vextar felt sick. How many? How many of our people were actually humans in disguise? Enough, Admiral Kyung replied. The exact number is not important. What matters is that the war could have ended in our favor at any time we chose. We allowed it to continue because we were still learning about your capabilities and positioning assets for future conflicts. The terrifying implication hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Humanity had not been fighting for survival. They had been conducting a massive intelligence operation while testing their weapons and tactics against live targets. Dr. Morden looked up from his research data. The dimensional manipulation technology. If you developed it 60 years ago, why did you not use it immediately? Because we are not a warlike species, Admiral Kyung said. We prefer patience to violence. We hoped the Coalition would eventually change its expansion policies without requiring direct confrontation. But when you began Operation Starfall, Captain Huan added, when you planned to cleanse entire sectors of primitive life, you forced our hand. We could not allow genocide to proceed in our name. Lieutenant Nari activated a recording device. Coalition voices filled the room, their own voices from the meeting on Nexara Prime over a year ago. They listened to themselves dismissing humans as myths while planning to destroy any primitive species they encountered. Every word you spoke in that council chamber was recorded and transmitted to our leadership, Nari explained. We knew about Operation Starfall 6 months before your fleets launched. The Coalition leaders realized they were looking at a species that planned not in terms of years or decades, but in centuries. While aliens worried about quarterly supply reports and annual military budgets, humans had executed strategies that spanned multiple generations. Admiral Vextar found his voice. "What happens now?" "Now we coexist," Admiral Kyung said simply. "The coalition continues to govern its member species. Humanity governs ours. We establish trade relationships, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense agreements." "And if we refuse?" Commander Yulthak asked. Admiral Kyung's expression did not change. "Then you continue to fight an enemy that has been studying you for 3 centuries, knows your every weakness, and possesses technology that makes your most advanced weapons look like stone knives." The choice was not really a choice at all. Dr. Morden set down his data pads. "We accept your terms." As the peace accords were signed, Admiral Vextar reflected on the lessons of the war. The coalition had thought they were fighting primitive, savages. Instead, they had encountered a species that used patience as their primary weapon and time itself as their ally. The legend spoke of humans as fierce warriors. The reality was far more sophisticated. Humans were apex predators who hunted entire civilizations not with claws and fangs, but with intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking that operated on timescales that other species could barely comprehend. As the coalition delegation prepared to leave Luna, carrying news of humanity's emergence to a galaxy that would never again underestimate the power of legends, one truth had become clear. Humanity had never been the primitive species hiding from superior aliens. They had been the superior aliens, patiently waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The hunters had finally stopped pretending to be prey, and the galaxy would never be the same.